What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Josh. Today we're going to be ranking all 6 films in the Scream franchise from worst to best. I really enjoyed making my Saw ranking. Also, it's spooky season, so it's time to rank some horror franchises for sure, especially since that's my favorite genre. I figured why not start with my 2 favorite horror franchises, the first being Scream, the second you'll have to stay tuned for. I have always loved the Scream franchise ever since I saw the first one when I was probably way too young because I remember it scared the absolute shit out of me. I see people saying that Scream is a horror comedy. It's really not. It does have comedic elements to it, but they are horror first, but they do have an element of self-awareness and meta to them. These aren't like Scary Movie or Happy Death Day, but they have brilliant commentary on horror tropes and gleefully participate in said tropes while also making fun of them. Also, they have great characters. That's another big part of why I love this franchise. Slashers rarely have characters that you genuinely care about and want to see live through the entire thing. That's what makes this unique to me. And you can't talk about Scream without mentioning the greatest final girl of all time, Sidney Prescott. Quick spoiler warning, this video will contain spoilers for all 6 of these films, and I think you should absolutely watch them before you watch this video. I'm going to be talking killer reveals, deaths, all of it. So if you haven't seen them, click off now, come back when you've seen all of them. And remember, this is just my opinion. Now let's get started. I used to really loathe Scream 3, but to be honest, it's really grown on me and I don't think there's a single bad movie in this franchise. This movie has aged like wine. Most notably because it has undertones of the whole casting couch phenomenon in Hollywood, and it was weirdly produced by the Weinsteins. Almost like that was a bit of a warning sign. It is too silly and comedic though. I think this is the one film in the Scream franchise that you could say is almost more of a comedy than it is a horror film. Also, Sidney spends almost the entire first half of this film isolated. At this point, she's living on her own in the middle of nowhere, trying to keep her identity a secret, which makes sense, I guess, but it's not very fun and satisfying to watch, especially since she spends a lot of her time just totally depressed and seeing visions of her dead mother, although it's later implied that it might actually be Roman somehow emulating her voice. Yeah, this movie does have a lot of flaws.
Oh, it's hard being friends with you, Sidney. When you're friends with Sidney, you die.
While Sidney's doing her thing, Gale and Dewey are infiltrating the set of Stab 3 as a new Ghostface begins killing off the cast. This is the most meta of them all. I mean, it's the first Scream film not written by Kevin Williamson. There were a lot of rewrites and they even poke fun at that in the movie. It does have some great trilogy capper rules, courtesy of Randy, who died in the last movie, but we get to see him again thanks to a video that he supposedly recorded before his death. I really don't like the Stab 3 cast members. Jennifer Jolie is definitely a standout, but the rest of the characters, they're just cannon fodder. Also, in this one, Ghostface has a voice modulator that can somehow perfectly mimic anyone's voice when it's convenient for the story. I don't think that kind of technology existed in the year 2000. I don't even think it really exists now, at least to an accessible extent. As far as I'm concerned, this movie is saved by the awesome third act. And I'll say Roman isn't my favorite Ghostface by any means, but there's some genuinely great commentary in here about how the third film in a trilogy likes to go back to the beginning and add layers to a pre-existing storyline. It's highly silly, heavily implausible, but it is some pretty sharp commentary, and I can't really deny that.
You ready for this? Never.
Oh, stop. Wait.
There's certain rules to surviving.
The fact that this movie occupies the second to last spot, and I already really like it, is a pretty good sign. I mean, Scream 5, or Scream 2022, whichever you want to call it, is a 4 out of 5 movie for me, and we still have 4 to go after this one. Let's get the negatives out of the way first. This movie definitely has a lack of good chase scenes. It's a lot of just Ghostface popping out of somewhere, stabbing somebody, and boom, they're dead. The kills are pretty graphic, but the art of the chase is part of what makes a slasher good, and this definitely lacks that a little bit. Sidney also isn't super well utilized. Her entrance was just really awkward to me, and it almost felt like they kind of shoehorned her into the plot. Because what this movie really is doing is introducing a new cast of characters, and the old characters are kind of just the background dressing. Melissa Barrera wasn't fantastic as the lead, but more on her when we get to Scream 6. And to many this will be a nitpick, but god damn it, I get so sick and tired of the empty, dark hospital trope. The sequence where Tara gets attacked in the hospital, it's completely empty, there's no staff anywhere, no patients, and the lights get cut. I can't stand that as a trope. And the thing is, this is Scream, so they had a golden opportunity to comment on that trope and at least make a joke about it or something. Then I could justify it being used in the film, but they just don't comment on it at all. The opening scene is excellent, though. It's probably the scariest one since the original, and it does subvert your expectations by having Tara survive. She's the first opening attack scene victim to make it out alive. And this movie does have a beating heart at the center of it, that being Dewey. They really Han Solo'd him in this movie, and I don't understand why people dislike that. They gave him a great, if tragic, arc. The scene between him and Gale is really powerful, especially with the knowledge that these two were actually married in real life before. And his death does hit hard. Makes a little less sense when you realize that Amber did it, and she's like, what, 5'2", probably like 100 pounds, whatever. The commentary on requels, as they call them, isn't a franchise best, and it's really more of a spin on Scream 4, but it's different enough, and I for one thought it was pretty hilarious that the killers are just pissed off, obsessed fans who want to create new source material for the Stab movies. I would say this falls into the category of Scream movies that necessarily didn't need to be made, but I had a lot of fun with it.
Guys?
I didn't really know what to expect from Scream 6 because it was the first one to really integrate this new cast of characters without having the old characters to fall back on. Gale is in this one and Kirby's in there too. We'll talk more about those two later. But right from the opening, I was really surprised by this one. It has a really cool subversion of expectations once again, with a killer unmasking themselves in the opening minutes only to find out that that killer is about to be killed himself. The directors of 5 returned for this one, and they definitely listened to the fan complaints when it comes to a lack of chase sequences, because this one has a lot of great ones, especially Gale in that apartment. And the change of setting to New York City was a surprisingly fresh idea. And that allowed them to include some really cool set pieces, like when they have to traverse across a ladder between these two high-rise apartment buildings, and of course the subway scene. Although it does make some improvements off of 5, I think it definitely lacks the guts that movie had to kill off characters. I mean, so many people in this movie get stabbed like a dozen times. It's so ridiculous the amount of damage that they take, and they somehow not only survive, but end up still walking around and doing things through the rest of the movie. And I know that realistically, it's not impossible for people to survive a lot of stabbing. The human body is very resilient, but it's really unrealistic when you think about the fact that people have died from far less in previous movies in this franchise. Scream 6 definitely does have less commentary than some of its predecessors too, but it still has some great comedic self-aware moments. For instance, in the opening scene, there's a character that's watching Jason Takes Manhattan on his TV. It's nice to see Kirby back too. I do feel that she doesn't have quite as much personality as she did in Scream 4, but nevertheless, cool to see her. And hot take incoming, but I actually am glad they didn't try to shoehorn Sydney into this one. I know it was over a pay dispute and it wasn't a creative decision to not have her be in this. But this movie isn't really about Sydney or Gale or Dewey. It's about these new characters, and if you're gonna put Sydney in another Scream movie, I think that she should be the forefront, the protagonist, so it would have felt weird to have her be in this. When it comes to the killers, they pretty much just have a simple revenge motive, which is not as great as some of the more creative ones in the past. But I actually really like Detective Bailey, and Quinn was a nice misdirect by faking her death earlier on. But man, Ethan sucks. He's just totally bland, predictable Ghostface material. At least they did have a little bit of a twist in that there were 3 of them this time, which has never been done. And lastly, there actually is a pretty solid arc in this movie for Sam and Tara, in that Sam has to learn to let Tara go and give her some independence. And Tara also learns to open up about her trauma a little bit. And I can't quite put my finger on what's changed between 5 and this one, but I feel like Melissa Barrera is a lot better here. She's just so ferocious. I guess initially I wasn't sure how to feel about the fact that she sees visions of Billy as she is his daughter. But in this one, you really see how there's this rage inside of her, and when it comes out, it's kind of terrifying.
Robert's residence.
Welcome home, Sydney. You're a survivor, aren't you, Sydney? What good's it to be a survivor if everyone close to you is dead?
10 years after Scream 3, Wes Craven returned to cash in on the remake craze of the 2000s, and it is just insane how ahead of its time this movie is. I mean, seriously, a killer who wants to play the victim and gain fame, it's crazy how accurate that is to certain things that influencers do nowadays for views. Emma Roberts is fucking awesome as Jill, especially in that scene in the 3rd act where she has to mutilate herself to make it look like a struggle. Charlie obviously pales in comparison as a Ghostface killer, but man, she more than makes up for it. We got some brutal kills here too, especially after Scream 3 felt pretty tame. This one definitely ups the blood. And I gotta talk about the opening. I mean, it's probably the most meta of them all, and I love it. As far as negatives go, it does have this weird overlit glow to it in terms of the look. I'm not sure if that was a deliberate choice by Craven, but I don't care for it. Dewey is kind of useless in this one. I don't care for him and Gale's little conflict and arguments that they're having throughout the movie. And admittedly, other than Kirby and Jill, a lot of the new characters are disposable and uninteresting. I think 5 might have had better side characters. Kirby is awesome though. I mean, that scene where Ghostface quizzes her on horror remakes is iconic. I do think that 4, 5, and 6 are pretty damn close in quality, but the reason I put 4 above the other two is that I think it's the most cohesive and it has the most to say about the time period that it was produced in. The ending in particular, I mean, it's almost kind of haunting the way we see these news reporters calling Jill an American hero. Meanwhile, it's interjected with images of her lying dead on the hospital floor. I think it's safe to say that she's probably the best killer from any of the sequels. It's crazy that Scream 2 came out under a year after the original came out and it's still this good. It has an epic opening scene with Ghostface killing a couple in a screening for the adaptation of Sidney's story in the first film, which is very meta. Not only is this film a commentary on sequels, but also the idea that life can imitate art and vice versa. Sidney really becomes a badass in this one, but she's still a complex, flawed character trying to work through what happened to her in the first one. We get some big character development for Gale in this one too, and it's crazy that they made her so unlikable in the first, and then you actually come to really love her in this one. And that scene with her and Dewey being chased in the lecture hall is so tense. Marco Beltrami's score is so awesome. And we get a lot of memorable side characters in this one too, like Joel and Cotton. Also, the gut punch with the death of Randy. A lot of people don't like Mickey, but his motivation of wanting to get caught so that he can go to trial and plead insane on the basis of watching too many horror movies is so out there that I absolutely love it. I'll admit, the reveal of him being one of the killers is not very shocking. It could have been if he was in the movie more, but he just kind of disappears for a good 40-minute chunk. But the Mrs. Loomis twist is awesome too, and the fact that she acknowledges that Mickey's plan is crazy before killing him, it's a twist on a twist. She really just needed an extra set of hands to get to Sidney. Hell, even Derek's ridiculous dance scene in the cafeteria, which everyone else seems to universally hate, I kinda like. It's even more sad when you discover in the end that he was actually innocent. This is a fantastic sequel, and some people out there even think it's better than the original, but I'm not in that camp.
This is Gail Weathers with an exclusive.
Authorities are baffled.
Been warned by the killer.
It all began with a scream over 911.
And so we've come to my favorite slasher of all time, and this is coming from someone who isn't a huge fan of slashers. I mean, I obviously acknowledge a lot of the big classics out there like Halloween, Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it's not my favorite category of horror. But this movie was the first of its kind, starting out with an iconic opening scene that's both terrifying and self-aware, and it's crazy that Drew Barrymore was all over the marketing for this movie, and then people go to see it and she dies in the opening scene. That was really shocking for its time.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
Also, I think this one easily has the best references, the best roster of characters, and the freshest commentary. It really does cash in on all of the classic slasher tropes. Teens having sex, drinking, wandering off by themselves, an unstoppable killer that just won't die. It's so fun the way this movie plays with all of those. Sidney experiences growth across all of these films that she's in, but she's so great in this one too. Neve Campbell does a fantastic job of portraying this character with a lot of past ghosts, but she's also super badass and has that great final line of "not in my movie" when she shoots Billy. Speaking of Billy, I think this movie is great as a whodunit too. They give you a nice misdirect with Billy being arrested and you're like, okay, now it can't be him because it's too obvious, right? And Matthew Lillard is equally as good as the absolute nut job that is Stu. And there's some fantastic dark humor too when they start stabbing each other at the end to make it look like they were left for dead by the killer. In fact, this might be my favorite third act in all of horror. There's just so much going on, a lot of characters being juggled, but Wes Craven, he's the master, man. So that is my ranking of the Scream franchise from worst to best. Again, I like all of them. 4 through 6, you could say, are almost tied, and they're all 4 out of 5 movies. And then, of course, we have 2 in the original, which is awesome. And I'm glad I rewatched Scream 3 because I used to not really like it, and now I see a lot of redeeming qualities in it. Now I'm turning it to you guys, though. I want to know what you think. What is your favorite Scream film? Do comment your list down below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more rankings like this, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.